Human Maid was just serving blood in the vampire court, until the vampire king saw her mark and froze. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The court was alive with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting their brilliant glow onto the marble floors, which were polished so well that you could see your own reflection. Long, velvet curtains swayed gently in the breeze, but inside the vampire court, everything was still. The vampires in attendance moved with a grace that could only come with centuries of practice. They did not speak much, and their eyes rarely left their glasses of blood. This was their world, and for most humans, it was a world of unseen danger and untold power. Among the vampires and their guests was a human maid, someone who had never truly belonged in such a place. She had spent her days cleaning the marble halls and serving in the shadows, always careful to remain invisible. Her name was Clara, and she had never been given a reason to think she was anything special. She had been raised in a small village, far from the glimmering world of vampires and royalty. But here she was, serving drinks to the most powerful beings in existence. Her presence as unnoticed as the dust she cleaned from the walls. Clara was just doing her job when she was called to deliver blood to the high table. She had been instructed to serve the finest crimson wine to the vampire guests, those who sat closest to the throne. It was a simple task, one she had done countless times before, but today, something was different. As she entered the grand hall, carrying the tray of blood-filled goblets, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden and overwhelming sense of being out of place. The air felt heavier, the whispers in the room sharper. And then it happened. The vampire king, who had been seated at the far end of the table, turned his gaze towards her. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. She froze, unsure of what was happening. The room fell into a deep silence as the king's eyes narrowed. There was something in his gaze, something that made Clara's heart race in her chest. It was as if he saw through her, into her very soul. But then he looked away. It was almost as if the moment had never happened, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She didn't understand why, but she knew that something had stirred inside him. Was it her? Her hands? Or perhaps the mark that she had always hidden beneath her sleeve. The mark that she had never really paid attention to. The mark that no one had ever noticed, until now. She stood there, her mind racing, as the king's gaze slowly shifted back to the others at the table. But the strange tension in the room didn't fade. It lingered, and Clara felt as though she had just made a dangerous mistake. What did the king see? Why did he freeze like that? And more importantly, what would happen to her now that he had noticed her? Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she turned to leave the room, but she knew that this moment would change everything. She had no idea what fate awaited her, but she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the vampire king's interest in her was only just beginning. The silence in the room felt suffocating as Clara quickly gathered her tray and retreated from the vampire king's gaze. Her heart was racing in her chest, every step she took echoing in her ears. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she knew one thing for certain. The king had noticed her, really noticed her. She tried to shake the feeling off, telling herself it was nothing, just an odd moment. But deep down, something inside her stirred, something she couldn't quite name. She passed through the ornate hallways, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and unease. What did his eyes mean? Why had the room frozen the moment he saw her? She couldn't stop replaying the look in his eyes, the way he seemed to see straight through her. The feeling of being under his scrutiny lingered like a shadow, following her even as she went back to the servants' quarters. Clara placed the tray down and tried to focus on her duties, but the image of the vampire king haunted her. He was unlike any other vampire she had seen before. His presence was overwhelming, his power palpable in the air around him. As much as she tried to ignore it, Clara couldn't deny that there was something magnetic about him. She had always heard stories about the vampire king, the ruler of all the vampires, a figure of legend and mystery. But she never imagined she would be the one to catch his attention. The thought unsettled her. The king's gaze had been intense, but there had been something more, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. It was as if he knew her, or rather, knew something about her that she didn't even understand. Clara sat on the edge of her cot, her mind racing with questions. She had always thought of herself as just another maid, just another human serving in the court of vampires. She had never imagined that something as simple as a look could change everything. Was there more to her than she realized? Clara had been raised in a small village, far from the grandeur of the vampire world. She had been taught to keep her head down, to stay unnoticed. But now, after that moment with the king, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take an unexpected turn. Later that night, as she was finishing her chores, a knock came at her door. Clara froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, standing there was one of the king's personal guards. His expression was unreadable, his tall frame towering over her. "The king wishes to see you," he said in a voice as cold as stone. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Me? Why?" she asked, trying to mask the panic rising in her chest. "He did not say," the guard replied, stepping aside to let her pass. Clara's mind raced as she followed the guard through the winding halls of the castle. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the closer they got to the king's chambers, the more she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. When they reached the large, ornate doors, the guard knocked twice before opening them. Inside, the vampire king sat at his desk, his back to her, surrounded by ancient books and scrolls. He was alone, and yet, there was a palpable aura of power in the room that made Clara feel small and insignificant. "You wish to see me, your majesty?" Clara asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. The king turned his chair slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. His gaze was as intense as before, but this time, it seemed to hold something else, something deeper, something that made her feel exposed. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "What is this mark?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She instinctively reached for her sleeve, pulling it down to cover the faint symbol on her wrist, the mark she had never paid much attention to. It had always been there, a small, almost invisible scar that she had assumed was just a birthmark. But now, in the presence of the king, it felt like something more. I don't know, your majesty," Clara stammered. "It's just a mark I've always had." The king stood up, his piercing gaze never leaving hers. He walked toward her slowly, and Clara couldn't help but take a step back. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist where the mark was hidden beneath her sleeve. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her body, and she gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. "This mark," he whispered, his voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and suspicion. "It is not just any mark. It is a symbol of something ancient, something long forgotten. And you, Clara, are the key to unlocking it." Clara's mind spun. What was he talking about? She had never heard of any such symbol. What did it have to do with her? And why was the vampire king so interested in it? "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this means, but I can promise you one thing. This mark will change everything. It is tied to something far bigger than either of us." The king's voice was heavy with an ominous undertone, and Clara could see that the weight of this secret was something he had carried for centuries. "You are not just a maid, Clara," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "You are part of something much older, something that even I do not fully understand. But I will find out, and you will help me." Clara stood frozen in place, the weight of his words sinking in. What had she gotten herself into? What was this mark, and why was the king so determined to learn its secrets? There were more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. Clara stood frozen, the vampire king's words echoing in her mind like a distant drumbeat. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, as she did in that moment. His touch on her wrist lingered, a reminder of the mark she had tried to ignore all her life. She had never thought much of it, but now, it felt like the key to a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. "I don't understand," Clara said, her voice trembling. "What do you mean by unlocking it? What is this mark?" The king studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as though he was weighing his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets. This mark is ancient, Clara. It is a symbol of power, a lineage long thought lost. Your bloodline is tied to the most powerful vampires who ever lived. That mark on your wrist, it signifies that you are the last of them. Clara felt her knees weaken as the realization set in. She wanted to protest, to tell him that he was mistaken, but the look in his eyes told her he was not lying. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She was the last of an ancient line of vampires? A human maid, barely scraping by, suddenly the last hope for a forgotten legacy? But, I'm just a maid, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I have no power, no connection to any vampire royalty. The king stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. That's where you're wrong, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. You have power. It's in your blood. And it's more than just the mark. The curse on your bloodline runs deep. It has been passed down for centuries, and now, it's your turn to face what has been hidden from the world. Clara shook her head, trying to understand what he was saying. I don't even know who my parents were. I was raised in a village far from here. There must be some mistake. The king's eyes softened, though there was a flicker of something dark in them. The mistake is mine, Clara. I should have known sooner. I should have recognized the signs. But you've been living among us, unnoticed, for too long. His voice trailed off, as though he was speaking more to himself than to her. Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine as the king continued. Your bloodline was hidden for a reason, Clara. The vampires who once ruled this kingdom feared what it could become. They sealed away the truth, thinking it was too dangerous. But now, the time has come for the truth to be revealed. Clara could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had spent her entire life in the shadows, never thinking she was anything special. Now, she was being told that she was the last of a powerful bloodline, a bloodline with a mark that could change everything. What does this mean for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What am I supposed to do with this power? The king's gaze never wavered, and his words hit her like a cold wind. You are the key, Clara. You are the only one who can unlock the power hidden in your blood. But you must be willing to accept your destiny. Clara stared at him, unsure of what to say. Her life had just been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. She was no longer just a maid in the vampire court. She was something more, something dangerous. What happens if I refuse? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. You cannot refuse, the king replied, his voice firm. This is not a choice. You were born to carry this mark. And now, you will help me restore the balance that has been lost for centuries. If you refuse, the power will consume you. It will destroy you from the inside out. Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her like a suffocating fog. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the certainty in his voice made it clear that this was no idle threat. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. The king stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. We will start by finding the truth about your bloodline. You will come with me, and together, we will uncover the secrets hidden in your past. Once we understand the power within you, we can use it to protect this kingdom from the forces that seek to destroy it. Clara nodded, though she still didn't fully understand. She had no choice. The king was right. This power, this mark, was a part of her now, and there was no turning back. As the king turned to lead her out of the room, Clara couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be part of a world she didn't belong to. But now, she was tied to it in a way she couldn't escape. And whatever secrets her bloodline held, they were about to come to light. Clara followed the vampire king through the cold, stone hallways, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel his presence ahead of her, like a shadow hanging over her every step. His footsteps echoed through the halls, the sound reverberating off the ancient walls. Every corner they turned seemed to lead her deeper into the heart of the castle, and Clara felt the weight of the moment settling over her. This was no longer just a walk through the vampire court. This was a path she could never turn back from. The king had made it clear that her life was no longer just about serving drinks and cleaning floors. She was a part of something much larger, something much more dangerous. As they walked, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led into the unknown, a place where the past and future collided. They reached a large door, made of dark wood and adorned with intricate carvings. The king turned to her, his eyes intense and unreadable. "This is where we will begin," he said quietly, pushing the door open with a creak that seemed to echo in the silence of the castle. Clara stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. The room was filled with old books, maps, and scrolls, a place that smelled of dust and ancient knowledge. It was clear that this was where the secrets of the vampires had been kept for centuries. The king walked to a large desk, the surface cluttered with papers, and gestured for Clara to sit. She did so reluctantly, still unsure of what was happening. "You must understand, Clara," the king said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "Your bloodline is one of the oldest, most powerful families of vampires. Your mark is not just a symbol. It is the key to unlocking the true potential of this kingdom. But it is also the key to understanding the curse that has been placed upon us." Clara looked at him, her mind spinning. "A curse?" she asked, struggling to comprehend. "Yes," the king replied. "For centuries, the vampires of this kingdom have been trapped by a curse. It is a dark magic, one that was cast long ago, and it has held us captive ever since. But your bloodline, the blood that runs through your veins, is the key to breaking it." Clara shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand. I'm just a maid. How could I possibly have anything to do with a curse that powerful?" The king's gaze softened for a moment, and he stepped closer to her. "That is what you will learn, Clara. You are not just anyone. The curse is tied to your bloodline, but it is also tied to your destiny. The moment you were born, the pieces were set in motion. You are the only one who can stop it." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that her life was ordinary, simple even, but now, the weight of the king's words was shattering everything she thought she knew. "What do I have to do?" she whispered. The king stood back, his eyes never leaving her. "First, we must learn the full truth of your family's past. We will search for the ancient texts, the ones that tell the story of the curse and the bloodline that carries it. Then, we will begin the journey to break it." Clara nodded slowly, though she still didn't fully understand. She had never asked for any of this. She had never wanted to be a part of vampire politics, never wanted to be tied to a curse that had lingered for centuries. But now, there was no escape. As the king turned to gather the scrolls and ancient books, Clara's mind raced. What had she gotten herself into? What did her bloodline really mean? Was she truly the only one who could stop this curse, or was there more to the story than the king was telling her? Her thoughts were interrupted when the king returned, holding a large, worn scroll in his hands. He unrolled it carefully, revealing symbols and markings that Clara couldn't understand. "This," he said, pointing to a section of the scroll, "is the history of your family, the bloodline that you are a part of. These markings tell the story of the curse and the one who cast it." Clara leaned forward, her curiosity growing despite the fear that still lingered in her chest. "Who cast it?" she asked. The king's face hardened, and he looked at her with a grave expression. "It was a betrayal, Clara. A betrayal by someone close to the throne. Someone who wanted to use the power of your bloodline for their own gain. That betrayal is what started the curse, and it has haunted us ever since." Clara felt a surge of anger. "So, this curse was caused by someone within the vampire court? Someone who wanted to use my family's power for their own benefit?" The king nodded. "Yes. And now, you are the one who must undo the damage. You are the only one who can break the curse, but it will not be easy. It will take everything you have, and more." Clara stood up, her hands trembling as she faced the king. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I'm just a maid. What if I fail?" The king's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you realize, Clara. This is your destiny. You may not know it yet, but you were born for this. Together, we will uncover the truth, and together, we will end this curse." Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't know if she was ready for what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. She had already been swept into a world of vampires, curses, and ancient power, and now, she had to face it all head on. Whatever the future held, Clara was ready to find out. The king was right. It was her destiny, and she would not let fear stand in her way. Clara stood still, her hands shaking as she absorbed the weight of the king's words. The room felt colder now, the ancient scrolls around her whispering secrets she was not yet ready to understand. The truth of her bloodline, the power hidden within her, had been laid bare, and with it, the responsibility of a destiny she never asked for. The king's eyes were unwavering, his gaze fixed on her with a mix of expectation and resolve. She was no longer just a maid. She was the key to breaking a curse that had bound the vampires for centuries. But how could she, a simple servant, possibly carry the weight of that burden? "What do you need me to do now?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The king's expression softened, though there was still an undeniable gravity to his words. "We need to find the last remaining pieces of the puzzle, Clara. The curse can only be broken by uncovering the true source of its power, and that source is hidden within the bloodline you carry." Clara nodded slowly, but the uncertainty was still there, swirling in her chest like a storm. "But how do we find this source?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. The king stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but his tone was almost gentle. "First, we will seek out the ancient texts that speak of your bloodline. They are scattered across the kingdom, hidden in places even I cannot reach. You will need to go beyond the castle, into the lands where the vampires once ruled." Clara's heart raced. "You want me to leave the castle?" she asked, surprised by the thought. "Yes," the king replied. "You are the last living member of this bloodline. Only you can unlock the secrets hidden in those lands. But you must be cautious. The journey will not be easy, and there are those who would do anything to stop you from succeeding." Clara swallowed hard, feeling a cold chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The king's expression darkened. "There are others who seek to control the power of your bloodline, Clara. They know what it can do. They know what you can do, and they will stop at nothing to ensure that the curse remains intact." Clara shivered at the weight of his words. The idea of enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike, made her stomach turn. She had never asked for any of this. She had only wanted a quiet life, free from the dangers of the vampire court. But now, her life had been torn apart by forces she couldn't begin to understand. "But why me?" Clara asked, almost pleading. "Why am I the one who has to do this?" The king's eyes softened, a rare flicker of something like sympathy crossing his features. "Because, Clara, you are the last hope we have. Your bloodline is the key to everything, the balance of power, the curse, and the future of the vampire kingdom. You may not understand it yet, but you are stronger than you realize. You were born for this." Clara looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't just a maid. She was a force of nature, bound by blood to the very fate of the vampires themselves. She didn't know if she was ready for what lay ahead, but she knew there was no turning back. She was already on this path, whether she liked it or not. "What do I need to do?" Clara asked, her voice steady now, despite the fear that gripped her. "You must travel to the farthest reaches of the kingdom," the king instructed, his voice low and firm. "There are ruins, lost places where the answers lie. You will need to seek them out, find the relics and the scrolls that have been hidden for centuries. And when you return, we will be ready to break the curse." Clara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her mind. The journey sounded impossible, and the thought of facing unknown enemies made her blood run cold. But she had no choice. This was her destiny now, whether she was ready for it or not. "And when I return?" Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready to hear the answer. The king's gaze grew colder, more intense. "When you return, Clara, we will break the curse. We will destroy the dark magic that has kept us bound for so long. But you must be prepared. The journey will test you in ways you cannot imagine, and not all of us will survive it." The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She had no illusions about the dangers ahead, but she had already stepped onto this path. There was no turning back now. "I'll do it," Clara said, her voice firm. "I'll find the answers. I'll break the curse." The king nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good. I knew I could count on you." Clara turned to leave, but before she could step out of the room, the king's voice stopped her. "One last thing, Clara." She turned back, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes." The king's eyes were intense as he looked at her. "Trust no one," he said, his voice cold. "The vampires who walk among us are not always what they seem. You will need to rely on your instincts, and your instincts alone." Clara nodded, a chill running through her. She had no idea who she could trust, but she would have to figure that out along the way. With one last look at the king, she turned and walked out of the room, her mind racing. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but Clara knew one thing for certain. She was the last hope for the vampire kingdom, and she had no choice but to see it through. Clara had left the safety of the castle and entered the wilderness, the world outside the vampire king's walls unfamiliar and cold. The journey ahead was uncertain, and every step she took seemed to carry her deeper into a realm she didn't understand. The king had warned her about the dangers of the path she was on, but it wasn't until she was alone, walking through the dense forest, that the weight of his words truly settled in. She was on her own now, no guards, no one to rely on but herself. The world around her felt menacing. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to watch her every move, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. She quickened her pace, her heart racing with each step. Clara couldn't help but feel the eyes of the forest upon her. There were creatures here, things she had only heard whispers of in the castle, but she didn't have time to dwell on that now. Her mission was clear: find the hidden relics, uncover the truth of her bloodline, and return before it was too late. She had no idea what she was looking for, but she trusted the king's words. Deep down, she knew she had to succeed, for the sake of the vampires and for herself. After hours of walking, Clara came across a clearing. The moonlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting an ethereal glow on the ground. In the center of the clearing was a large stone structure, its surface weathered and covered in vines. Clara approached cautiously, her instincts telling her that this place held something important. She could feel the pulse of energy in the air, as though the very ground beneath her feet was alive. She had found something. The stone walls were covered in ancient markings, symbols that looked familiar, yet foreign. Clara's fingers brushed over the stone, tracing the lines of the symbols. She could almost hear a whisper in the air, as though the stones themselves were speaking to her, urging her to uncover their secrets. But how? The king had said that only she could unlock the power of her bloodline. But what did that mean? What was she supposed to do here? As if in answer to her question, Clara's hand brushed against a small indentation in the stone. It was barely noticeable, hidden among the carvings, but when her fingers pressed into it, the stone shifted, revealing a small compartment. Inside, there was a relic, a small, intricately carved box, no larger than a book. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The box was cool to the touch, its surface smooth and flawless. It seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't understand, yet it felt familiar, like it belonged to her. Clara opened the box cautiously, her heart racing. Inside was a ring, set with a deep red stone that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. She had no idea what it was or why it was in this ancient place, but she knew one thing for certain. It was the key to everything. She slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling its warmth spread through her hand, and in that moment, everything changed. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air around her grew thick with power. Clara's vision blurred, and she stumbled backward, barely managing to catch herself on the stone wall. The symbols on the stone structure seemed to shift and change, swirling around her as if they were alive. Then, the voice came. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it resonated deep within her. "You are the last of us," the voice said. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Who was speaking to her? What was happening? The voice continued, its tone both soothing and commanding. "The bloodline you carry is the key to restoring balance. You must embrace it, or the world will fall into darkness." Clara felt a surge of energy course through her body, her blood humming with power. The ring on her finger glowed brighter, its red stone now burning with an intensity that threatened to blind her. She tried to pull away, but the energy held her in place, wrapping around her like a chain. The voice spoke again, this time louder and more urgent. "You cannot run from your fate. You are the one who will end the curse, but you must first unlock the power within yourself." Clara's mind raced. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't feel ready for any of this. But deep down, she knew she couldn't turn back. This was her destiny. The ring on her finger pulsed with power, and Clara felt a surge of heat flood through her veins. The markings on the stone walls seemed to resonate with her, as though they were guiding her, showing her the way forward. With a final, determined breath, Clara stepped forward, feeling the weight of her bloodline pressing down on her. She was no longer just a maid. She was the key to everything. The curse, the vampires, the future of this world. It all rested on her shoulders now. And she would not let fear stand in her way. She would uncover the truth of her bloodline, embrace the power within her, and do whatever it took to end the curse. Her journey had only just begun, and she knew the road ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty. But Clara was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. She was no longer a servant in the shadows. She was the last hope for a kingdom, and nothing would stop her from fulfilling her destiny. Clara stood in the clearing, her body still humming with the energy the ring had released. The air around her was thick with an unsettling power, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath her feet, alive with an ancient force that she could barely comprehend. The voice, the one that had spoken to her from the stone walls, still echoed in her mind, urging her to embrace her fate. Her heart was racing, a mixture of fear and determination, as she slowly took in her surroundings. The clearing, the stone relic, the symbols, everything felt surreal, as if she had stepped into a different world altogether. The weight of her bloodline, the responsibility she now carried, threatened to crush her. But in that moment, Clara understood something that terrified her. There was no going back. She was the key, the last hope to end the curse that had haunted the vampire kingdom for centuries. But what would it mean for her? And what would she have to sacrifice to fulfill this role? Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The king's words were still fresh in her mind. He had told her that the journey ahead would be dangerous, that she would face enemies who would stop at nothing to ensure she failed. But she had already come so far. There was no turning back. Clara couldn't ignore the pull of the ring on her finger, the way it seemed to guide her forward, urging her to uncover more, to learn the truth of her bloodline. She looked around the clearing once more. She had to move on. There were more secrets to uncover, more pieces of the puzzle that needed to fall into place. With a final glance at the stone structure, Clara turned and walked toward the forest's edge. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across her path. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the rustling of leaves beneath her feet. She had no map, no guide. The king had given her little more than a vague direction. But she had the ring. She had the power. And she had a destiny to fulfill. As she made her way through the dense woods, Clara couldn't help but think of the king, his cold eyes and the weight of his expectations. He had been both a guide and a force that she couldn't deny. She couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than he had let on. Had he known all along that she was the key to breaking the curse? Or was she merely a pawn in his greater game? The deeper Clara traveled into the wilderness, the more uncertain she became. The world outside the vampire kingdom was unfamiliar and harsh. Every creak of the branches above, every snap of twigs underfoot, made her jump, her senses heightened. The forest felt alive, but not in a comforting way. It was as if something was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. And then, she heard it. A rustling in the bushes to her left, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to steady her breath, to calm her racing thoughts. The king had warned her. There were those who would stop at nothing to prevent her from succeeding. Clara's instincts told her to run, but she knew she couldn't. She had come too far. She had to face whatever danger was coming her way. Slowly, she turned toward the source of the noise. Her hand reached for the knife at her belt, the only weapon she had. The footsteps grew louder, the figure emerging from the shadows. A man, tall and cloaked in dark robes, stepped into the moonlight. Clara's grip tightened on her weapon, ready to defend herself. But the man didn't approach. He stood still, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, his features sharp and angular. He was no ordinary traveler. "You shouldn't be here, girl," the man said, his voice low and rasping. Clara took a step back, her hand still on the knife. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I am one who serves the old ways," the man replied. "You are walking a path you do not understand." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The old ways. What did that mean? Was this man connected to the curse? To her bloodline? "I'm not afraid of you," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. "I have a purpose here, and nothing will stop me from fulfilling it." The man's lips curled into a sinister smile, though there was something almost respectful in his gaze. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said. "But the path you walk is dangerous." There are forces at play that you cannot even begin to comprehend. There is more to your bloodline than you realize. The ring you wear will not protect you forever. Clara's hand faltered, the weight of his words sinking in. What did he know about her bloodline? What did he know about the ring? What do you want from me? Clara demanded, taking another step back, her voice trembling. The man's smile faded, replaced by an almost pitying expression. Nothing, he said softly. I've come to warn you. But be careful, girl. The truth is not always as it seems. Trust no one. With those final words, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Clara standing alone in the moonlit clearing. Her heart was racing, her thoughts swirling with questions. Who was that man? And why had he warned her? As Clara continued her journey, the weight of his words lingered in her mind. She had been warned, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what. She had no choice. The future of the vampire kingdom, and her own fate, depended on her next move. And Clara was ready to face whatever came next. Clara continued her journey through the dense forest, her mind consumed by the stranger's warning. The words "trust no one" echoed in her head, but what did that really mean? Could she trust the vampire king? He had given her the ring, told her she was the key, but did he have his own agenda? Was she just a pawn in a game far bigger than she could understand? Her heart pounded with uncertainty as she moved through the forest, each step carrying her deeper into the unknown. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the darkness around her seemed to press in closer with each passing moment. The path was treacherous, and the forest felt alive with unseen eyes watching her. She had no choice but to press forward. There was no turning back now. Clara knew she was on the cusp of something monumental. The ring on her finger pulsed with a strange warmth, guiding her like a beacon, but also reminding her of the weight of her bloodline and the curse that had haunted the vampire kingdom for centuries. She had to find the truth, whatever it cost her. As she continued, Clara noticed something unusual. The trees around her were not as dense as they had been moments ago. The path before her opened up into a wide clearing, bathed in the eerie light of the full moon. In the center of the clearing stood a stone structure, ancient and weathered, but unmistakably out of place in the natural surroundings. Clara's pulse quickened. This was it. She could feel the energy emanating from the stone, the same force that had pulsed through the ring when she first put it on. It was a connection, a sign that she was on the right path. She approached the structure cautiously, her footsteps slow and deliberate as she examined the carvings on the stones. The symbols were the same as those she had seen before, in the clearing where she had found the ring. These markings, however, were more detailed, more intricate, as if they had been placed here for a purpose, perhaps to unlock a deeper layer of the mystery. Clara's hand reached out to touch the stone, and the moment her fingers brushed against the cold surface, a surge of power shot through her body. She gasped, stumbling backward as the energy overwhelmed her. Her heart raced, her breath shallow as she struggled to regain control. The ring on her finger flared to life, its red stone glowing brighter with each passing second. The symbols on the stone seemed to shift and change, swirling around her as if they were alive. She could feel the power of her bloodline awakening, the deep connection between her and the ancient magic that flowed through the earth. Clara's vision blurred, and she felt as though she was no longer standing in the clearing but transported to another time, another place. She saw flashes of images, ancient vampires, cloaked in shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She saw a throne, bathed in darkness, with a figure sitting upon it, its face obscured, but the aura of power unmistakable. A voice echoed through the haze of her mind, a voice that seemed both familiar and distant. The bloodline must be restored. The curse must be broken. Clara gasped, the vision fading as quickly as it had come. She was back in the clearing, her hand still pressed against the stone. The power that had surged through her body was fading, but the sense of connection remained. She wasn't just a witness to this history, she was part of it. The realization hit her hard. Her bloodline was not only tied to the vampires, but to something far older, far more powerful. She wasn't just the last hope to break the curse. She was the key to restoring the balance of power in the vampire kingdom. But with that knowledge came a deeper understanding of the risks. The king had warned her, but the stranger's warning was even clearer now. She couldn't trust anyone. She had to rely on herself. Clara stepped back from the stone, her mind racing as she processed the flood of images and feelings. The clearing was silent now, the energy from the stone subsiding, but the weight of her discovery hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. She knew she had to keep moving. The next step in her journey would take her deeper into the heart of the vampire kingdom, into places where secrets were buried, and where the lines between friend and foe were blurred. As she made her way through the clearing, Clara felt the ring on her finger pulse once more, guiding her forward. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew one thing. The curse could only be broken if she uncovered the full truth of her bloodline. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no turning back. She was already a part of this world, whether she wanted to be or not. And the future of the vampire kingdom rested in her hands. Clara continued her journey, the weight of the ring on her finger a constant reminder of the path she had chosen. Her heart raced with every step, as the forest around her seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The energy from the stone structure had left her shaken, but it had also given her a sense of purpose. She knew now that she was not just a witness to the vampire kingdom's struggles. She was at the very center of it. The ring pulsed against her skin, guiding her, but also pulling her towards something that felt both dangerous and inevitable. As she moved deeper into the woods, Clara's thoughts swirled with uncertainty. The ancient carvings, the visions, the voice, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Her bloodline was the key to breaking the curse. But how could she unlock that power? What did it mean to truly embrace her destiny? She had no answers, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. The journey ahead would be treacherous, and she would have to face it alone. As she walked, Clara noticed a change in the air. It was still heavy with the scent of pine and earth, but there was something else, a sharpness, an unnatural quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and the usual rustling of the trees had gone still. Her instincts kicked in, and she immediately stopped, scanning her surroundings. That's when she saw it, movement in the shadows. A figure stepped out from between the trees, tall and cloaked in darkness. Clara's hand instinctively went to the knife at her side, but she didn't draw it. She wasn't sure if she should fight or run. The figure stepped closer, and Clara could see the glint of pale skin and cold eyes beneath the hood. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, their voice low and gravelly. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had been warned about enemies, but this one felt different. The stranger's presence was suffocating, and the air seemed to grow colder as they spoke. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, trying to sound confident, though her voice wavered. The stranger tilted their head, studying her with a look that made her skin crawl. "You don't remember me?" the stranger asked, their voice tinged with a hint of amusement. Clara frowned, confusion sweeping over her. "I don't know you," she said, taking a cautious step back. "I don't even know who I can trust anymore." The stranger smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Trust is a luxury you cannot afford, Clara. Especially now." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she took another step back, her mind racing. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want nothing from you," the stranger replied, their smile fading into something more sinister. "But you must understand, there are others who seek to control the power you carry, and they will stop at nothing to make sure you don't succeed." Clara's blood ran cold. She had known there were enemies, but this was the first time someone had spoken so openly about it. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. The stranger didn't answer at first. Instead, they stepped closer, their gaze piercing. "Not all enemies are what they seem," the stranger said cryptically. "Some are closer than you think." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Was the stranger referring to the king? Was he hiding something from her? Or was there another vampire, or even another force, that she hadn't considered yet? The stranger seemed to sense her confusion. "You will find out soon enough," they said softly. "But be warned, the closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous your path becomes. The king may not be the ally you think he is." Clara's heart skipped a beat, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice shaking. The stranger smiled again, that same cold, empty smile. "Only time will tell," they said before turning and disappearing into the shadows. Clara stood there, frozen in place, the weight of their words sinking in. The king, her supposed ally, was not what he seemed? Could she trust him? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Was the king hiding something from her? Was there more at play than just the curse? Clara didn't know who to trust anymore. The journey ahead had become even more complicated than she could have imagined. She had come to find the truth, but now she wasn't sure if the truth would set her free or drag her deeper into a web of deceit. The darkness of the forest seemed to close in on her as she stood there, uncertain of what to do next. She had to make a decision. Should she continue her journey to uncover the secrets of her bloodline and break the curse, or should she turn back and confront the king about what she had learned? She knew she couldn't go back. The path ahead was hers to walk, no matter how uncertain it was. With one last look at the shadows where the stranger had disappeared, Clara made up her mind. She would continue forward. There was no turning back now. The future of the vampire kingdom and her own fate depended on her next steps, and she would not let fear stop her from discovering the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. Clara's footsteps echoed in the silence of the forest as she moved deeper into the unknown, the weight of the stranger's words pressing heavily on her mind. Her heart was in turmoil, caught between the path the vampire king had set her on and the doubts that the stranger had planted. The king may not be the ally you think he is, the words repeated in her mind, each time growing louder and more insistent. She had trusted him, believed that he had given her a purpose, but now, she wasn't so sure. Was there a deeper truth she wasn't seeing? Or had she been blinded by the promise of power, of breaking the curse? Her grip tightened around the ring on her finger as she walked, the pulsing warmth a constant reminder that she was on the precipice of something far bigger than herself. She had already learned that the curse was tied to her bloodline, and that she held the key to its destruction. But at what cost? The answers seemed so close, yet just beyond her reach. Clara pushed forward, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the dangers. She had to keep moving, had to find the next piece of the puzzle, even if she didn't fully understand what the puzzle looked like. As she walked, the trees began to thin, and the air grew warmer. The dense forest began to open into a vast, open plain. At the far edge of the plain, Clara could make out a structure. It was distant, but unmistakable. A castle, much like the one she had left behind, but older, its towers crumbling and overgrown with vines. This was the place she had been searching for. Clara quickened her pace, her heart now pounding with anticipation. She had to reach the castle. She had to find whatever was hidden there. She had no idea what she would discover, but she knew this was the next step in her journey. As Clara approached the castle, she felt a strange sense of foreboding. The walls were high, covered in ivy, and the gates were rusted shut, as though no one had entered in centuries. Still, she pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets it held. The closer she got, the more the air seemed to vibrate with power. It was almost as if the castle itself was alive, breathing in sync with her own heartbeat. When she reached the gates, she hesitated, her hand hovering just above the rusted iron. There was no turning back now. She had to find the answers. With a steady breath, Clara pushed the gates open, the creaking sound echoing through the stillness. Inside, the courtyard was overgrown with wildflowers and weeds, but it was clear that this place had once been grand, a stronghold of ancient power. Clara walked through the courtyard, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of life. The stone walls were covered in intricate carvings, some familiar, some completely alien. The symbols seemed to shift as she passed by them, almost as if they were watching her, waiting for her to understand their meaning. At the center of the courtyard stood a large stone pedestal, and on it rested an object, covered in a cloth. Clara approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. What was it? She reached out and pulled the cloth away, revealing an ornate box, similar to the one she had found in the clearing. This one was larger, its surface intricately carved with the same symbols she had seen on the castle walls. Clara's heart raced as she examined the box. This was no ordinary artifact. It was something more, something tied to her bloodline, to the curse that had haunted her family for generations. Without thinking, she opened the box. Inside, there was a single, ancient scroll. It looked fragile, the parchment yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Clara gently pulled it from the box, unrolling it with care. The text was written in a language she didn't recognize, but the symbols, the same ones from the stone carvings, were etched across the parchment. Her eyes scanned the scroll, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of it. And then, she saw it. At the bottom of the scroll was a single line, written in a different script, one she could understand. The blood that holds the key shall unlock the throne, but it shall come at a cost. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The throne? What throne? The blood that holds the key. Her blood. She was the key to the throne, the key to breaking the curse, but what was the cost? What had she been asked to sacrifice? As the weight of the words sank in, Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had come so far, but now the truth seemed even more elusive than ever. The curse had been placed upon her bloodline long ago, and the path to breaking it led her here, to this ancient castle, to this relic. But was it worth the cost? Clara's heart hammered in her chest. The weight of the decision before her was overwhelming. What was she willing to sacrifice to save the vampire kingdom? She had already lost so much, but could she give up more? The ring on her finger pulsed again, its warmth a constant reminder that she had no choice. The time for questions was over. She had to move forward, whether she was ready or not. With one final glance at the scroll, Clara tucked it into her bag and turned to leave the castle. The path ahead was still uncertain, the dangers unknown, but she knew one thing for certain. She was the key, and her destiny was waiting for her. The curse would be broken, but only if she had the courage to face whatever was to come. Clara walked through the moonlit forest, the ancient scroll tucked safely in her bag. Her steps were steady, but her mind was anything but. The words on the scroll, the blood that holds the key, the throne, the cost, echoed in her thoughts, growing louder with every step she took. She had no idea what this throne was, what price she would have to pay, or what would happen when she reached the end of her journey. But one thing was certain, she was getting closer to the truth. The castle had held secrets, but this was different. This was a piece of the puzzle she hadn't even known existed. Her bloodline, her purpose, everything was tied together now. Clara had always thought of herself as ordinary, a maid in the vampire court, just trying to survive. But now, she was anything but ordinary. She was part of a legacy that had been hidden, a curse that had been placed on her ancestors long ago. Her heart pounded as she walked, each step carrying her deeper into a world of danger, secrets, and power she could barely understand. The deeper she went into the forest, the more the tension built in her chest. The silence around her was suffocating, and every rustle of leaves seemed to make her jump. It was as if something was lurking just beyond her vision, something watching her every move. Clara had been warned. The stranger, the man who had appeared in the forest, had told her that others would stop at nothing to prevent her from succeeding. But who were these others? And why did they want her to fail? She had no answers, only more questions. The air seemed to grow colder as she moved further into the woods. The path became more difficult, the trees more dense, as if nature itself was trying to slow her progress. The ring on her finger pulsed with warmth, as if it was urging her forward, guiding her on the path she was meant to walk. She didn't know where she was going, but somehow, she knew she was on the right path. After what felt like hours of walking, Clara stumbled into another clearing. The trees parted to reveal a stone structure, its jagged edges silhouetted against the night sky. It was ancient, even more so than the castle she had just left, with weathered stones and ivy creeping up its walls. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But Clara felt a strange pull toward it. Something about this place felt important. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The air around the structure was heavy, thick with power. She could feel it in her bones, like the very earth was alive with energy. As Clara approached the entrance, she noticed the carvings on the stone walls. They were the same symbols from the ring, from the castle, from the scroll. It was as if they had been guiding her to this very spot, to this ancient place. Clara's fingers brushed against the cold stone, and for a moment, the world seemed to shift. The air around her crackled with energy, and the ring on her finger glowed brightly. She gasped, stepping back as the ground beneath her feet trembled. The structure seemed to come alive, the carvings on the walls shifting and changing before her eyes. She could hear the faint whispers of a language she didn't understand, ancient words that seemed to call to her from the depths of time. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward, the door of the structure slowly creaking open before her. She entered, the air inside cool and damp. The walls were lined with more carvings, more symbols, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal. On the pedestal, resting in the center of a stone basin, was a glowing crystal. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This was what she had been searching for. The crystal was pulsing with the same energy she had felt in the forest, in the castle, and in the ring. It was the key, the final piece. Clara approached the pedestal slowly, her hand trembling as she reached out toward the crystal. As soon as her fingers brushed against it, the energy in the room surged, and the ground beneath her feet shook violently. The crystal flared with light, blinding her for a moment. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing in her chest. The light slowly faded, and when her vision cleared, she saw that the crystal was no longer just a stone. It had transformed, its surface now covered in intricate runes, glowing with the same symbols that had followed her all along. The whispers in the room grew louder, more insistent. The language, ancient, powerful, spoke directly to her. She could feel the weight of the words, but they were still just out of reach. Clara closed her eyes, focusing on the feeling that was growing inside her. She could hear it now, the rhythm of the words, the pulse of the magic. It was in her blood, in her bones. She had always known she was different, but now she knew the truth. This power, this curse, it was hers to wield, but it would demand something from her in return. As the realization sank in, Clara understood what she had to do. She had to take the crystal, embrace the power within it, and use it to break the curse. But at what cost? The whispers in the room grew louder, urging her on, telling her that this was the only way. She had no choice. The future of the vampire kingdom, her own future, depended on what she did next. With trembling hands, Clara reached out and took the crystal. The moment she held it, the room erupted with light and sound. She felt the power surge through her, a force so immense that it nearly overwhelmed her. But she held on, gripping the crystal tightly. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She was the key, and the time to unlock her. Destiny had finally come. Clara held the crystal tightly in her hand, its warmth seeping into her skin, a powerful, ancient energy coursing through her veins. The room was filled with the sound of whispers, strange, indecipherable words that seemed to come from all directions. The glowing runes on the crystal pulsed with life, their light dancing in the shadows of the chamber. Clara's heart raced as the weight of the moment pressed upon her. She had done it. She had taken the crystal, embraced the power within it. But what now? What came next? The air was thick with power, as though the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Her fingers tightened around the crystal, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. She could feel the pulse of her bloodline, the ancient power that flowed through her, resonating with the crystal's energy. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet was alive, and it was responding to her presence. "You are the one," a voice said, soft and deep, almost like a sigh carried on the wind. Clara's heart skipped a beat. The voice had come from within her, as if it had been a part of her all along. The truth was settling in. She was the key. The whispers spoke again, the language she now understood, flowing through her like a river of ancient knowledge. The throne must be claimed, and the curse must be undone. Only the one with the bloodline can restore balance. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The throne, the cost, the price for breaking the curse. The realization was overwhelming. The cost was more than she had anticipated. The throne was not just a symbol of power. It was the very heart of the curse, the very thing that had kept the vampire kingdom in its dark grip for centuries. The throne had been corrupted, its power twisted by the curse that had been placed upon her bloodline. And now, it was her responsibility to restore it, to bring balance back to a kingdom that had been living in shadow for far too long. But as Clara stood there, the weight of the crystal in her hands, she understood that the journey ahead was not one she could walk alone. The curse had created enemies, and they would stop at nothing to keep the throne from being restored. She had already encountered one warning, one stranger who had spoken of the dangers she would face. Clara knew that her enemies were not just the ones in the shadows, but even those who walked in the light, hiding their true intentions behind false smiles and noble titles. The king, could she truly trust him? Or had he been using her all along to fulfill his own ambitions? The thoughts swirled in her mind, but there was no time for hesitation. Clara had come too far to turn back now. She had the crystal, she had the knowledge, and she had the power. The path ahead would be dangerous, yes, but she was the only one who could walk it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she turned toward the pedestal where the crystal had been. The whispers seemed to intensify, urging her forward. She had to go to the throne, to the heart of the curse, and break it once and for all. But as she stepped toward the door of the chamber, something stopped her. A shadow crossed her path, and Clara froze. She recognized the figure standing before her. It was the Vampire King. He had followed her, but she hadn't sensed him until now. He stood there, his eyes piercing, his presence heavy with authority. "Clara," he said, his voice like velvet, but with an edge of something more dangerous beneath. "You've come this far, but you don't understand the full extent of what you're about to do." Clara's heart skipped a beat, her grip tightening on the crystal. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. The king stepped closer, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "The throne you seek to claim," he said, his words laced with a warning. "It is not just a seat of power. It is a weapon, a force that binds the very fabric of the vampire kingdom. If you break the curse, you risk unleashing something far worse. Something that could destroy everything." Clara's mind reeled. "I thought you wanted me to break the curse," she said, confusion and anger mixing in her voice. "I thought you wanted me to restore the balance." The king's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I do," he said, his voice softening. "But there are things in this world that should never be disturbed. The balance you seek to restore may very well tip the scales into chaos. The power you now possess, Clara, it is not something that can be controlled easily." Clara stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Was he trying to protect her? Or was this just another part of his plan? "Then why send me on this journey?" Clara demanded. "Why give me the crystal? Why tell me I am the key?" The king's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Clara saw something flicker behind his eyes. "Because you are the only one who can do it," he said, his voice filled with a strange mix of regret and resolve. "But you must be prepared. Once you claim the throne, once you break the curse, there will be no turning back. The price will be steep." Clara's mind was spinning. The throne, the curse, the power, it was all connected, and yet, she was still unsure of who she could trust. She had come so far, and now, she was faced with a choice. Restore the balance and face the consequences, or walk away and leave the vampire kingdom to its fate. The choice was hers, and the path she chose would define everything. With a final, deep breath, Clara made her decision. "I will do it," she said, her voice firm. "I will break the curse, no matter the cost." The king's eyes softened, just for a moment, before he turned away. "Then go," he said. "But be careful. There are forces at play that even I cannot control. And once you take that step, you will be on your own." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. The final battle was ahead, and she was ready. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. She stepped forward, the crystal pulsing in her hand, and walked toward the unknown. Her destiny awaited. Clara stepped forward, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. The path ahead was unclear, but there was no turning back now. The Vampire King's words still echoed in her mind, but she had already made her choice. She would break the curse. She would restore balance, even if the cost was more than she could imagine. As she walked toward the throne, the room seemed to stretch before her, the air thick with anticipation. The crystal in her hand pulsed with a steady beat, as if it were alive, as if it were connected to her very soul. She could feel the power surging through her, the bloodline that had always been there, hidden deep inside her, now awakening. The throne loomed before her, ancient and imposing, its dark presence almost suffocating. Clara could see the faintest traces of magic swirling around it, a dark energy that seemed to resist the light. This was it, the moment of truth. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold stone of the throne. The moment she touched it, the world around her seemed to shift. The air grew heavy, and the whispers of the past filled her ears, ancient voices calling to her, urging her to take her place. Clara could feel the magic, the curse, pulsing from the throne, wrapping around her like a suffocating cloak. But she was not afraid. Not anymore. With a deep breath, Clara closed her eyes and placed the crystal into the center of the throne. The moment it made contact, the room erupted in light. The force of the magic pushed her back, and she stumbled, but she did not fall. The throne began to tremble, the runes carved into its surface glowing brightly, casting an eerie light across the room. Clara could feel the power of her bloodline coursing through her, merging with the energy of the throne. The crystal pulsed, brighter and brighter, until it was blinding, and Clara felt herself being lifted off the ground, suspended in the air by the sheer force of the magic. She could hear the voices of the past, the whispers of the ancient vampires who had cursed her bloodline. But now their words were different. Now, they were no longer filled with anger and resentment. Instead, they spoke of release, of redemption. The curse that had bound her family for so long was breaking, unraveling with every beat of her heart. But as the magic surged, Clara felt the weight of the cost. The price of breaking the curse was steep, and she could feel it now, deep within her. The power she was tapping into was not without its price. Her body burned with the energy, and she could feel her strength fading. She knew that if she continued, she might not survive. But there was no turning back. She had made her choice. She would sacrifice whatever it took to free the vampire kingdom. The light from the throne grew brighter, and the magic reached its peak. Clara's vision blurred, and for a moment, she thought she might pass out. But then, she heard a voice. It was familiar, but different. It was not the king, not the voices of the ancient vampires. It was her own voice, speaking to her from deep within. "You are not alone," the voice said. "You are the key, but you do not have to carry this burden alone." Clara's heart skipped a beat. What did this mean? She felt the magic around her begin to shift, as if it were responding to her. The energy, the curse, the throne, they were all part of her, but they did not define her. She was more than the bloodline. She was more than the throne. She was Clara. The light around her began to dim, and the pressure on her body lessened. The magic was still there, still powerful, but it was no longer suffocating. Clara opened her eyes, and the throne before her had changed. The dark energy that had surrounded it was gone, replaced by a soft, warm glow. The curse had been broken. The balance had been restored. Clara's body trembled as she lowered herself to the ground, her legs weak beneath her. She had done it. She had broken the curse. The vampire kingdom was free. But as she stood there, she knew the journey wasn't over. There were still dangers to face, still questions to answer. The vampire king's motives, the truth about her bloodline. Everything had changed, but Clara had not yet found all the answers. She turned to leave the chamber, the weight of the crystal still heavy in her hand. But now, it was a symbol of power, of hope, not of darkness. The door to the chamber opened before her, and she stepped out into the night. The air felt different now, lighter, as though the world itself had shifted. The curse was broken, but the future was still uncertain. Clara knew her journey wasn't over. The kingdom was free, but her own path was just beginning. And she would face whatever came next with the strength of her bloodline and the power of her choices. As she walked into the night, she understood one thing. For certain, she had claimed her destiny. And no one, not even the vampire king, could take that from her. Vampire stories have always captivated readers with their dark allure, mystery, and supernatural elements. In this gripping tale, Clara embarks on a journey filled with danger, self-discovery, and the unveiling of her ancient bloodline. As she faces the weight of a curse that has haunted her family for generations, Clara discovers the truth about her destiny and the power within her. With the help of a mysterious crystal, Clara learns that she is the key to breaking the curse that binds the vampire kingdom. But as she navigates treacherous paths, the lines between friend and foe blur, leaving Clara to question whom she can truly trust. As the power of her bloodline awakens, the stakes rise higher, and she is forced to confront not only the vampires who seek to control her, but also the cost of her choices. With every step, Clara must decide how much she is willing to sacrifice to free the kingdom and herself from the grip of the curse. This is one of the most compelling vampire stories that explores the intricacies of power, loyalty, and the consequences of embracing one's true fate. As Clara steps into her destiny, she uncovers secrets that change everything. But the journey is only just beginning. The world of vampires is full of hidden truths, and in these pages, readers will be taken on a roller coaster ride through betrayal, mystery, and redemption. The story weaves together the age-old themes of vampire mythology, creating a narrative that will leave fans of vampire stories on the edge of their seats, eager to see what comes next.